Ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome to the Block Crunch Podcast, the go-to podcast for investors and builders in crypto. This episode is also brought to you by Paraswap. Stick around to learn more. All right, hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Block Crunch Podcast. Now today we're going to talk about one of the largest DeFi protocols that has only just over a year of operation, but they're already generating over $200 to $300 million in volumes daily, sometimes even higher. And for context about what that number means, Coinbase generates about $2 billion a day. And this is after 9 years in operation. So this is the story of Sushiswap, which started as an anonymous fork of Uniswap, but has since launched a few of their own products and taken on a completely new direction as well. So I'm very excited to be joined by the CTO of Sushiswap, Joseph DeLong, and he's one of the only people on the team who's not anonymous lately. And he has agreed to join us to discuss Sushi as well as everything that's been happening around the project lately. So Joseph, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Joseph, you have one of the more interesting stories in crypto, in my opinion. You left the Air Force at the height of the financial crisis. And I think in one of your tweets, you mentioned that, in your own words, you didn't have any marketable skills at that time, but you eventually ended up working on the ETH2 client and then becoming the CTO of one of the largest DeFi protocols in the world. So I'm very curious about, what drew you to Sushi and kind of what led you down this path into crypto.
Yeah, I saw kind of people joking about this, and we're headed for our third once in a lifetime financial crisis for people who are millennials. That's kind of like parallels like my journey. Kind of we had this like .com crash, which kind of like was like huge motivation for I'd say like at the time the kind of like financial crash of the .com crash had an impact on my employability. Leaving the military, kind of like at the top of that housing crash, had an impact on my employability. And so after I got out of the military, I just went to college for 4 years and got a degree in math and computer science, and then I started like working at a bank at USAA, and I had already been active in blockchain and stuff. So they started to form like a blockchain lab, and I eventually got involved in Ethereum and used that skill to build something that I thought was neat. And we kind of like tried to shop it around, and eventually landed at Consensus working on the ETH2 client.
And how did you come across the Sushi team?
I talked to Maki early on in DeFi Summer. I think that like a lot of the people who are from that time, or like that like kind of were involved in DeFi Summer, I think that everybody was pretty close. There are lots of anonymous teams at that time,
Yeah, I'm actually curious about that because Sushi is a mostly anonymous team. So have you had experience working with anonymous people before? And what was the initial experience like just chatting with these icons on Twitter?
Yeah, I've worked with anonymous people before. It actually doesn't feel that weird because in a lot of cases, like you get to know someone through Discord messages or through, maybe they'll do like audio, like Google Meets or something. Typically, if you have a problem that needs a lot of attention, you'll need to do some sort of like call to discuss, because you can't really like type out all of the different variables, and it just becomes difficult to have that discussion in text. So you start to kind of like just get familiar with everyone, and it's pretty like I think it's like a reasonable way to work, honestly.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because with the rise of DAOs and crypto as well, you start to see a lot of teams, not just Sushi, but a lot of kind of DeFi teams and NFT teams that are completely anonymous. And I think even kind of investors who come into this space for the first time and they look at all these anonymous teams, they're kind of freaked out in the beginning. But then the longer you spend in the space, the more you realize it's almost becoming the norm here. And I want to kind of shift away from your background a little bit to talk about the product because Sushi recently announced the largest update to date called Trident. So before we dive into the specifics of that, one thing I think that really sets Sushi aside from other projects, it's the continual pipeline of new products. So behind the scenes, I'm very curious, how do you guys decide on what to build next, right? Is it more of a community-driven process where some people suggest in the forum what type of features they like, or is it more of a kind of team driven process where you guys say, hey, I think we need this piece and let's build that out right now and see what the community thinks?
I think it's mostly team driven. Like if we have things come in from the community, we'll respect them and give the attention. But kind of one of the things to consider is that there's a limitation to the amount of focus that people who are community members can give to Sushi. And as core team, that's really what we're kind of compensated to do. So we spend most of our time thinking about what direction the product should go, how we should build those products, how we can integrate better, because we really were closest to that problem. Like we've been working on. I think that we'll probably do some like Trident was definitely one that was obvious. I think that was obvious across the board. The way that we built it and architected it was probably different than I would say that the community would have wanted it. The community would have probably wanted us to build just exactly a V3 clone, and I think that is something that may have been like short-sighted. And so what we built is like relatively more complex. It gives us kind of an upgrade path in the future. Yeah. And so some of these projects, though, have come directly from the community, like Bento Box and Kashi and Miso. These are all community members who wanted to build something and build it under Sushi. But yeah, I think as we go forward, it'll probably be more like top down from core team in terms of like technical direction. And I think that's what a lot of people want to see. They want to see like our biggest complaint is that our product set just isn't integrated, and that's what we're headed towards.
Yeah, that ties really nicely into the next part of the conversation that we'll get into, which is how do you balance decentralized governance versus kind of efficiency when deploying products. But before we get to that, let's talk about Trident a little bit because Sushi is creating this new type of AMM, as you mentioned, and from the description, there's elements of other AMMs out there as well. There's elements of balancer, there's a little bit of curve, maybe a little bit of Uni V3 as well. So can you help us understand what Trident is and how it works?
Yeah, so Trident is an AMM, an automated market maker, decentralized exchange that we built on top of our platform called Bento Box. And Bento Box is where our lending platform is existing right now as well. And what it is it's an application vault. It allows you to deposit tokens, and those tokens underlying actually get put into yield-bearing strategies. Up to 80% of those tokens get put into yield-bearing strategies, and then 20% goes into cash on hand. And I like to use an analogy of like the way a bank works. You may have a balance that shows on your bank's website for how much you have in your account, but you don't actually have that. There's not a box with your name on it that's sitting in the vault. What happens is some of that money is lent, some of that money is invested, and some of that money is cash on hand for operations. And in that same way, Bento Box works the same way, except it's decentralized, and that money is able to be recalled whenever you need it. And so we built Trident on top of that, so that all of the money that you may be using to LP will also be doubly utilized in yield strategies, giving you a huge capital efficiency gain. And we also built Trident on top as kind of a factory for AMMs rather than just an individual AMM. We've seen like this waterfall process for the other AMMs, Balancer V2, UniV2, UniV3. Like we saw that process where kind of like every single time that they wanted to create a new AMM, they kind of tore down what they had already. And that's problematic for upgrades. And so what we decided to do was build this factory that allows you to have um, pools that are just conform to an interface, the iPool interface. And when they conform to that interface, they can be kind of like in the AMM. And we wrote a like, fantastic routing engine called Times that will allow us to kind of like tie all these pools together really easily.
Now, before I continue, I'd love to share one of my favorite products in crypto with you. Now, whenever I want to trade a token, instead of going to Uniswap, Sushiswap, Bancor one by one to see where I can find the best quote, I just go to Paraswap to scan for the best price anywhere. Because Paraswap aggregates all the popular Ethereum dexes and saves me a ton of time and headache in finding where I can trade something for the best price, and lets me trade in one place. Now, the cool thing is they've also integrated with Ledger Live as well, meaning I can now swap at the best prices directly from my Ledger wallet. So seriously, if you're a DeFi trader and you're worried about the security risks of centralized exchanges, but you also don't want to scour dozens of dexes just to find the best price, you have to check out Paraswap. So head on over to paraswap.io/blockcrunch. That's awesome. And I'm really curious. I'm actually really interested in this constant push for innovation in the MM space because I think before Sushi started, I think Uniswap was very much sticking to its kind of very vanilla design, and then it's almost as if after Sushi started, a lot of the innovation accelerated. I don't know if that's the truth behind the scenes as well, but at least from my perspective, it seemed like the introduction of competition pushed a lot of innovation forwards. And I've always enjoyed kind of watching your friendly rivalry with the Uniswap guys on Twitter as well. But I also noticed that there's actually a lot of collaboration as well with guys like Sam CC Sun from Paradigm helping audit some of the Sushi's contracts as well. So behind the scenes, what is the relationship like between, say, the Sushi team and the Uniswap team? Is there actually a lot of collaboration in DeFi, or is there, a lot of rivalry or competition, or kind of healthy competing between the two projects?
No, there's no collaboration. We reached out. Sam's part of Paradigm, and so yeah, we've reached out like consistently and kind of like have not been able to achieve anything in terms of a collaboration. Um, and so yeah, like I don't know what to say. We want to collaborate, but
Right, right. Yeah, so it sounds like there's still a lot of competition, which I guess long term is great for the space. So I'd love to kind of shift gears a little bit to talk about what we came here to talk about, which is the implications of decentralized governance, which was spurred on by this event, which is the Phantom Troupe raise. So to give our listeners a little bit of context here, recently Sushi proposed to raise I think about $60 million, or about 25% of the developer treasury from a collection of venture funds. So guys like Pantera Capital, Polychain Capital, Three Arrows Capital, and all the capitals. So this led to a month-long discussion where a lot of funds, a lot of retails, a lot of founders chimed in on the community forum, proposing kind of different fundraise structures and ultimately debating whether VCs should be given any type of preferential treatment in fundraises and whether VCs actually provide any value to companies that they work with. So ultimately, I think the race is currently on hold as of I think 27 days ago when I last checked the forum. So I'm really curious to get your take on this because I think you mentioned in one of your recent interviews that founders and venture capitalists usually take a lot of the value from projects, but builders and contributors are the ones that actually provide the most value by actually writing the code. So to kick us off, given that Sushi was almost founded as a no VC version of Uniswap, right? A fairly launched version of Uniswap. What is your general view on kind of VC's involvement in crypto? Are they a net positive force, a net negative force, or is it more nuanced than that?
first, I'd say the thing that I said in the other interview was about extractable value. Um, is founders and venture take almost all the extractable value from a project, and ignore the community aspect, where community is a huge driving force and value of a project. But I think that for VCs, it's more nuanced, right? Like I think it's would be very difficult to argue that Paradigm is not a huge like value add for um, their portco, right? And so I think that Sushi probably would benefit from some involvement from venture. I don't think necessarily um, that the strategy would be to um, do a treasury sale. I think maybe having venture that wants to participate in our community, maybe buy some on the open market or something. That would be an opportunity. But I really just was not a huge fan of the sale. In fact, I was pretty resistant to it from the jump. Um, so yeah, I think they do provide a lot of value, but also um, also I think that there's the community provides almost an equal amount of value.
Yeah, I think a lot of people share your sentiment where I think, especially back in 2017, a lot of the funds were formed and they were slightly more kind of predatory, and there was a lot of dumping on retails and that kind of behavior that led to a lot of bad faith between I'd say VCs and maybe the general retail investor. And I think a lot of people definitely echoed that sentiment in that forum. And as a result of that, the structure of the race was amended to offer the same terms to, I think, the open public and the selection of funds. But then even after that, it seemed like a lot of in the community still seems to have an issue with VCs getting involved in the sale at all. So that begs the question, where do we draw the line as to who is a community member and who isn't? And in your mind, do you view maybe VCs as a slightly separate entity as, say, the average retail participant in a community?
I mean, no, not really. I think so long as somebody has purchased the sushi on the open market, um, I think that they're ready to participate, especially if they have kind of like some of the skill sets that some of these venture firms have.
So I guess the follow up to that would be, should there be any type of sales at all for any type of projects in attracting these institutional capital, or are you more of the camp that projects should always opt for maybe a more fair launch community model?
Yeah, I think that's how we were started, and I think that's how we'll continue. Like, there's no lack of liquidity out there, and so this is a compromise where it was. I think some of our team was thinking, "Oh, we need help from VCs, but also we have this treasury that we need to make more stable." And just like any solution that is um, solving for two separate problems, it's under optimized. And so, in my opinion, the treasury sale in the way that it went forward is not doesn't really make so much sense. Um, and I don't think that we need to have any kind of like preferential treatment. Anybody's welcome to come and join, um, but they probably will just have to buy off the open market.
Yeah, that's such an interesting take because obviously some of the more used projects in DeFi today, folks like Uniswap, Compound, Aave, Curve, MakerDAO, they all had significant backing from VCs earlier on. Whereas really starting from DeFi summer, we started to see a newer wave of projects that were fairly launched, no VC participation, and it just launched to the community. Things like Wireearn and Sushi. So, do you think moving forward, the involvement of VCs early on in DeFi projects, and especially VCs with preferential treatment, in terms of kind of discounted rounds and so on, does that kind of delegitimize projects? And should founders aim to not raise from VCs moving forward?
Um, no, I think you should. I think you definitely should. If you're early on, there's a lot of these firms have a huge value add in terms of your maturity and like development of what you're going to build. Um, but also, I think that you can't be both, right? Like you
Hmm.
can't be kind of like this wholly venture funded and owned, and then also try and attempt to be a community project. It's kind of this path of divergence between the two. And so I think I see a lot of projects out there that kind of like want the stability and the assurances of having raised a venture, and then also are like kind of like clawing for a community. It's like, well, all the extractable value went to you and the venture firms, and so now there's nothing for the community to benefit from, and so you're kind of on your own, right? Like, yeah, I would like a community too. I'd like a community to like do my dishes and like do my laundry. Um, but unfortunately, I have extracted my life value in such a way that I am the one who's beneficial from it, right? So that's just that's the name of the game, I think.
And actually, when you say extractable value, can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
I mean, like equity and tokens.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, and I think this is such a delicate point because obviously with more centralized teams, with more kind of centralized ownership earlier on, uh, at least in some projects that raised from kind of very hands-on fund, there's probably more of an efficient decision making process versus something that's very decentralized from day one. And I think this ties back to what you were mentioning in the beginning, where a lot of the product roadmap is still decided by the team. But when it comes to things like fundraisers, it seems like the community is incredibly involved. So how do you balance, what types of decisions should be made in a central way, maybe advised by a board of VCs or just by the team itself, versus decisions that should be completely made open to the public to vote on and comment on?
Yeah, I think treasury is a big one. Treasury management, um, some like team composition and leadership um, stuff needs to be decided. Direction, rewards, like sushi rewards need to be decided by the community. I don't think that we have any kind of entitlement to that. Um, but I really think that the goal is that we continue to um, develop the develop sushi in such a way that ex sushi holders will be happy with it, and try not to have like I feel like there's a lot of voter fatigue in DeFi. Um, if you have to vote on literally everything, it becomes quite a chore.
Yeah, and Joseph, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on kind of who gets to have a say in decentralized governance as well, because I think one thing that I noticed in our kind of Phantom Troll proposal and this discussion forum, there were hundreds and hundreds of comments, and it became almost intractable to keep track of everything. So, should there be some sort of maybe token gated participation for governance forums, or should it be a more kind of open process? And if so, how do you kind of separate the signal from the noise over the long term?
That's a good question. I think that, in my opinion, that you shouldn't token gate that governance interaction because there are, and this is kind of like goes back to Ethereum. Like my time as a core developer, core developers don't token gate their access to um, governance proposals because there is a more broader like stakeholder community. So, for instance, for Ethereum, maybe they don't hold Ether, but they're miners, or maybe they don't hold Ether, but they're regulators, right? And these are people who need to participate in the conversation um, and kind of give their insight and input into something without necessarily being gated from participating in that conversation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I guess is the downside of that that there might be just a lot of noise from anyone who maybe holds uh, maybe sometimes they may not even hold sushi tokens at all. Do those people qualify as part of the community? Should they be entitled to an opinion? Or is that even the right framework to think about? Maybe the forum isn't about kind of meaningful voting or participation. It's more just a kind of sentiment gauge, and then the voting is where the actual governance happens.
Yeah, so yeah, I'd say that this is like similar to pre-consensus. in that it is a space where we're just kind of gauging sentiment about what's going on. And like on the surface, this like governance, on-chain governance or off-chain governance seems simple, right? Only people who have tokens get to participate, only those people get to have an opinion. But there's a much broader spectrum of people out there who actually have who are necessary in the process. Say, for instance, it was adding sushi as collateral to Maker or something, right? Like we would need input from the Maker community. We would need input from smart contract developers. You know, we need input from quants who might not necessarily hold sushi tokens, but their opinion on the subject matter is valuable and valid for how we go forward. Those are some situations that I can see, and so the forum definitely is like a signaling center, kind of like information gathering, like pre-consensus, and then I see the snapshot as being a kind of family-only, um, voting mechanism.
Yeah, and I guess bringing this discussion back to VCs as well, which is a very unique type of participant in the ecosystem, in that they're usually, at this point at least, if they're doing their jobs right, they're pretty sizable now, so they have significant sway over governance over different protocols. So do you see that as an issue when it comes to kind of voting on these snapshot posts, that maybe one venture investor, regardless of whether they got in a preferential treatment round, these massive kind of institutions, they can easily just outvote everyone else, as we've seen with some of the other protocols, which I'm not going to name. Do you see that as an issue, and how would that be resolved over time?
Yeah, it isn't necessarily an issue for us because of the way that we were formed, that it was a yield farm. And so there is not a significant majority concentration of tokens in venture hands. It's almost entirely community, and it would be difficult for a venture firm to get kind of a majority stake in Sushi to push a proposal that couldn't be rebuffed.
That makes sense. So it sounds like it all ties back to how the project was launched.
Yeah, and that's what I was hitting on earlier when I was talking about like a lot of these projects that kind of like start from venture funding, extract most of the value, and then afterwards say, "Oh man, it would be great if we had community." It's like, yeah, I mean, you made your choice. Now it's time to, reap what you sow in some senses.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that honest and candid take there. Well, Joseph, it's been really great to kind of get your time and really understand your thoughts on decentralized governance and what's been going on with Sushi. And for people who want to get involved with Sushi governance and understand what's happening at the ground level, what would you say are some of the best resources for them to start with?
Forum.sushi.com, and then join our Discord.
Awesome. I'll definitely link those in the show notes. Well, Joseph, thanks so much for taking the time again. This has been a great conversation.
Likewise, thank you.